Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And you can check us out on YouTube at the Team 980, where if you're watching, you see Eben Novy-Williams with me here in the, whatever this is, the StreamYard, the boxes that people watch sports in. That's all we do, Eben. We talk about sports and boxes.
My two favorite things.
Yes, sports and boxes. Eben, of course, with Sportico, covers everything sports business. You might remember we had Eben on quite a bit around the sale of the Commanders this time last year, as Eben was the one who actually broke that story, that Josh Harris was going to be the majority owner. But Eben, it is an interesting time in sports ownership in the NBA. We hear that the Celtics are going to go up for sale. Wyc Grousbeck and his ownership group are going to put them up, despite the fact that they just won a title. And that's kind of, I think, what you want to be a sports owner for. If you're a really rich guy, what do? You buy a sports team and you hope to win. They just did that. And it's also, I think, the thing that I want to kind of try to put into context first before we talk about the Celtics specifically is, like, we have all this new money theoretically coming with a new TV deal. We've talked about how they loosened some of the restrictions on international money, the Wizards being the first one to dive into that pool, and I think still the only one swimming in it, with the 5% sold to the Qataris last year. And ultimately, it seems like the value of these franchises are going up. Yet Mark Cuban, who bought in around the same time that Wyc Grousbeck and this ownership group of the Celtics did, got out. Grousbeck and company now getting out. What's going on here that some of the smartest people around NBA ownership seem to want out of the majority, at least, of NBA ownership?
It's a great question, Craig, and it's a question that I've been asked a bunch recently, and people who work in the industry are also wondering to themselves. There's people in leagues who sell, and the league on the whole is happy. They're glad to get new ownership, fresh blood, et cetera. And then there's teams that go up for sale that the league maybe doesn't want for sale. I would put Mark Cuban in this latter category, and I would definitely put the Celtics. The Celtics, as you said, just won a title. They have, I assume, the most talented roster in the NBA. They are probably the favorites to win the title again. The valuations are soaring. This group, as you said, bought in for $360 million. The team's worth more than $5 billion now. That will go up in the next few years as the new TV deals come online. This is not a franchise that you put on the list. If you had asked me a week ago, most likely NBA team to trade, Celtics were not high on that list. And I'm sure there's people at the NBA that look at this and they're like, really? Now the Celtics guys are getting out too? I think there's a number of ways to look at it. One, media is changing, and yes, there's a new TV deal coming for the NBA that is going to dramatically increase the valuation of each team and also the money that each team gets. But if you heard Mark Cuban after he sold the Mavericks last year, he said he's looking ahead at the next TV deal. That's the one that maybe has the fissures showing. So I think there's an argument there. The other thing, and this is what Wyc Grousbeck and the Celtics said publicly earlier this week, this is an estate planning thing. And I think a lot of sports fans don't understand, as these NFL and now NBA teams, as they get this valuable, when it becomes time to figure out what happens with the next generation, how do you divvy up the equity, who's going to be running the team? These become actually very difficult questions. And oftentimes it's happened dozens of times in the past few decades. We see teams sell because they can't figure out exactly what this is going to look like when the matriarch or the patriarch dies. So I think there's a part of that certainly for sure here. There's a lot of Celtics equity split among a lot of different people. Irving Grousbeck, who is Wyc Grousbeck's father, 89 years old, 90 years old. It sounds like they're starting to begin the process of figuring out what happens with the next generation. So I won't discount that either as a real consideration here.
That's actually extra interesting. I didn't know that this is where the conversation would go. But like we look at what's happened with the Lakers, right? Jerry Buss dies, and there was a huge power struggle between the kids, even though it was always kind of left to Jeannie to an extent. But like you have all of this capital and all of your net worth tied up in the Lakers, which is good if it's one person, because as we found out with Daniel Snyder, if you wind up selling the team, it's worth a lot of cash. And even though Dan Snyder would have liked to hold on to the team, he at least walked away with $6 billion in cash minus whatever debts he owed. And we'll see what else happens with Dan Snyder. But point is, like, once the cash got split, whatever equity was split between the Bus children, they really struggled, and they are now seen as like the mom and pop shop of the NBA. And I am curious if that's something where Wick Grossbeck is like, we've got this great thing going. Look at our chief rivals historically in the Lakers and how bad it is. We want to avoid that. Like, I'm curious, as if you've poked around ownership circles in the NBA, like, is anything along that conversation come up with the Lakers as a reason why they've fallen into whatever hole they're in right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great comparison. The Lakers have had, as you said, some very public disagreements between Jeannie and her brothers. I know more about this on the NFL side because those valuations historically have been way bigger, so it's something I focus more on. The Chicago Bears are the example everybody points to, controlled right now by Virginia McCaskey, who has a voting trust that lets her vote for the shares of all 13 of George Halas's grandchildren. When she dies, she's 90 something years old. When it's time for that voting trust to be dissolved, you suddenly have 13 children that have tiny little slivers of equity in the Chicago Bears. The NFL has stricter rules on how ownership can be structured than the NBA does. So at some point, the McCaskies will need to, at some point relatively soon, will need to reconstitute that equity among a single person or a voting share that a single person controls in order to keep the Bears in the McCaskey family. There's a lot of things like that happen where there's voting trusts that happen, and then you get it one generation deeper. It's a bigger deal in the NFL, not just because valuations are bigger, but as you know, Craig, those teams sell so much less frequently. So you have half the NFL has own these teams for multiple generations at this point. And some teams like the Giants and the Bears own the team for 100 years plus. So it becomes harder and harder as you have this $7 billion asset when you go from one owner to three kids, from those three kids now to, let's just say, 9 grandkids. And then you go from those 9 grandkids to 27 great grandkids. And suddenly the pool of money, while it is huge, is getting divvied up in incredible ways. Estate tax is a real thing if you can't get around it. Yeah, these conversations are quite tricky. And it's one of the reasons why, and we've seen it in the NBA a bit as well, but the NFL, in addition to private equity, all these owners are talking about these ownership rules. What can we change? Can we change the 30% rule that one single person has to have in terms of voting control? Can we change and they've lowered the percent that a single person has to have in terms of equity by his or herself? All these ownership rules that are getting loosened right now are happening largely because they're getting down to generations, and it becomes harder and harder to keep an asset. The more people there are in your family that feel that they have a right to it.
Eben Novy-Williams, Sportico, with us here on the Hoffman Show. And then the other part of that, though, is just like the sheer cash of paying for stuff. Like, if you are worth $5 billion and now you're split into two and you're worth $2.5 billion each, and one of you is no longer involved in the franchise, well, your owner just got half as rich. And so, like, I think that's part of what happens with the Lakers is, like, Jim Buss and the other siblings are like, well, Jeannie doesn't want us around. That's fine. But, like, she doesn't get to then use our money. And all of a sudden, all Jeannie Buss has is her share of it, and the Lakers have a smaller staff and all of those things than the rest of the league in a lot of ways, or in a lot of areas. And part of that is probably because it's not that they're cheap, but they can't afford to pay in the same way that like Ballmer can across town. And so there are real like operational concerns on top of the I don't know whether you call it politics or just like logistics, whatever the type of splitting and voting share argument and points that you just brought up.
Totally, yeah. The level of wealth in ownership circles varies dramatically, right? All these guys are wealthy, but Matt Ishbia, who just agreed to put a $4 billion valuation on the Suns so that he could buy the team, is in a different category of wealth than the Grossbecks are. He just is. So you do have a lot of these conversations also just come around to, as all the valuations go up, so do costs. And we can get into the Celtics, right, who are on pace to essentially break the mold for what it costs to keep a great team together. Those costs are also rising. So I think there's a lot of all of these different things, I'm sure, are playing a role in the decision that Wick and his father and the rest of the Celtics ownership group is going into the decision to sell the team now.
So let's get into that, because I saw arguments made both ways on the internet, which is the best place you go for cohesive arguments.
Exactly. Yeah, everyone's right.
Yesterday, yeah. So on the same day they announced that this sale is, the team is going to be up for sale soon, and it's a long process. There's going to be multiple closings. Ultimately, Grossbeck is not going to give up control until 2028. Is the most important? Yeah, is the most important headline here. But they also announced a 5-year, $314 million extension with Jason Tatum. Brown's got a $300 million contract. They pay Derek White $125. Like Holiday's got expensive money. Porzingis, like this is, as you said, a very expensive roster, even with some of the new cap restrictions, the second apron, all this kind of stuff. Does signing Jason Tatum to a 5-year deal make the Celtics more valuable? Or is that a downturn to an owner because it is a high cost? Because I assume that there's probably some truth to shreds on both, or of truth to that on both sides. You guys do valuations at Sportico. That's probably what you're actually known best for as a company. Is the valuations you put on these teams. So how does it play into the valuation, but then also into the rich guy who wants to buy the team and knows he's got to pay that salary?
I think it helps. Part of it, again, kind of depends on who owns the team, right? If it's someone who has more money than God, it's a huge benefit, right? If you reverse the thinking for a second, nobody who bought this team was not going to give Jason Tatum the max contract, right?
Sure.
There's no scenario, whoever it is, that wasn't going to happen. So I saw some people speculating that there's a buyer in place already because they're shelling out all this money. I don't think that that's true. It may be true. I don't know 100%, but I have a pretty good feeling that is not accurate.
If it is true or if it's not true, it's like, it has nothing to do with the Tatum contract. That's not a piece of evidence in support one way or another.
There was no chance that Jason Tatum was not going to get offered this deal to stay with the Celtics. We always say that new owners don't want turnkey. They want something they can sink a project into. Either that's roster construction, sometimes that's an arena situation, and we can talk about the Celtics arena situation because they don't own it. They're a tenant in it, and that does affect valuations to a degree. But the Celtics roster, for good or bad, and again, depending on the bidder, it probably varies, but this is a plug and play. It's expensive for sure. You might have to make some hard decisions. You may have to pay some pretty big luxury cap fines if you want to keep it together. But there's a whole wealth, and we've seen this recently with a number of new buyers in a number of different leagues. Steve Cohen is a great example. Matt Ishbia is another great example. A new class of owners who are worth decabillions, for whom spending is a little bit of a less of a concern than the class of owners we've seen before. So the Tatum deal, again, I don't think affects things either way because it was baked into everybody's assumption of what the Celtics roster was going to look like in the future. You can maybe say someone like Derek White is slightly different. But yeah, I think that whoever buys the Celtics is buying one of the 2 or 3 premier brands in the NBA. They're buying a team that can win on the field, on the court immediately. And those are the two of the main drivers, I'm sure, that are going to fuel the market in the next few months.
It also feels worth pointing out that if he doesn't want to close until 2028, we're in 2024, and that's when Derek White's deal would expire. And Tatum's is only a 5-year deal. And it's like, okay, they gave Tatum that 5th year. How dare they, lap me up with that? And if Brown signed a 5-year last year, he's up then. So like the timing actually works out on the roster side. And like, yes, of course, there's a huge window of tens of millions of dollars, which is a lot of money in almost any context, but tens of millions of dollars of, you have to hit the salary floor / where the first and second apron are and the luxury tax. But like to a billionaire, tens of millions of dollars is actually not that much money. There's a lot of other stuff, such as perhaps an arena that, yeah, right, must be nice. But like an arena, now that's an expense. The roster, like that's, I don't want to say it's built in, because definitely like I think the Warriors finally were like, okay, we paid luxury tax long enough. It's real money and it counts on the budget sheet. But comparatively speaking, it is a built-in expense that you're going to have to pay. Agreed.
And one word of caution I'll say on the 2028, if it is true that it seems like it's true that Wick wants to stay in control until 2028, those can get very messy. You've followed, I know, the Minnesota Timberwolves situation.
Oh God.
When Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry agreed in 2021 to buy that team in 4 successive years of payments so that Glenn Taylor could get 3 more years of control. And now they're in a legal battle that's going to be settled in arbitration later this year about the final payment. I asked Adam Silver at NBA owners meetings earlier this year if the NBA would ever approve a deal structured like that again. And he didn't say yes, he didn't say no, but he made it very clear that they have approved some deals in the past that maybe they have to think twice about in the future. So I would be curious to see if and when a Celtics deal does happen, if the staying in control through 2028 actually does indeed end up being the end result, or if someone comes to the table with enough money and says, look, I want to be able to pull the strings
I want it
immediately
now.
here.
Yeah.
Let's just make this really clean. So I'll be curious to see if that sticks around as a requirement, or if as the market comes and as the bidding starts, if we see that ease off a little bit.
And then to the arena piece of all of this, like the Celtics they've been at the Garden forever. Like that site is where the old Boston Garden relatively was, I believe. And being in that site seems to work out quite well for them. I mean, I don't know how much time you spent in Boston. I've been to that arena a couple of times for various things over the years. Like it is a phenomenal location. But teams like to own their own stuff. So what is the arena situation for the Celtics, and how does that affect what someone will pay for them?
It certainly affects valuations. The Nets, Joe Tsai, owner of the Nets, just sold an equity piece in the Nets parent company for a $6 billion valuation. Obviously, the Nets are the Liberty, the Nets, and the Barclays Center. So it does affect valuations for sure. I can't imagine, at least any in the near term, a new arena for the Celtics outside of where they're playing. I think the way it maybe affects things the most, I would be curious if we look at a list of hypothetical buyers, and I'm sure they would need outside money, but I would wonder if the Jacobs family, who owns the Bruins and owns the Garden, I wonder if they'd be interested. Because as you're saying, the synergies and the business opportunities when you own both the team and the arena, or both teams and the arena, become more. So I can make an argument that the Celtics are worth more to the Jacobs family than they are to anyone else. So I think that's one aspect that could come into play here. Who knows if Elon Musk wanted to buy the Celtics and spend a ton of money and make a new arena somewhere? Who knows if that would happen? I think that's very unlikely.
Welcome to the Moon Celtics.
Yeah,
like, what are we
exactly? Yeah, you have to take the rocket to get there. So yeah, I think in my mind it maybe impacts the interested buyers or interested price, but I'll be interested to see what the end up number is. We haven't really talked numbers here. Craig, Sportico values the Bruin or the Celtics at $5.12 billion, which is less than the valuation on the Nets. Theoretically, there's a premium for buying control, right? Which this Nets sale didn't do, or at least didn't do explicitly. But yeah, if you say plus or minus $6 billion, I don't really know. My gut says under, but we've seen these things get really frothy, and then suddenly there's a huge number that pops out of the back end. So who knows? I could see a wide range of multiple billions where the Celtics could sell, and it wouldn't shock me.
In terms of buyers, is there anyone that stands out? Perhaps someone who's tried to buy an NBA team and has been shut out. Obviously Ishbia just bought the Suns. That thing came together very quickly. With Sarver getting out. So what's the buyer list do we think preliminarily look like?
The most obvious one to me is Fenway. Fenway Sports Group owns the Red Sox, owns Fenway Park, owns the Penguins. Fenway executives have been very vocal that they want an NBA team. They have money. They have access to money. They are considered to be the heavy favorites to own the NBA's Vegas expansion team. I know they've done a lot of work on that front. The Celtics obviously have a lot of regional ties to Fenway that would make them interested. I don't know if that's enough for them to say no longer interested in Vegas. Let's try to do the Celtics instead. But they are an obvious one given the proximity, given their access to capital, and their stated interest in the NBA. There's some Celtics LPs that I would wonder if And maybe the answer is if they were going to do this, it would maybe be a cleaner transaction and they wouldn't need to go this public with it. But if someone like Steve Pagliuca, a longtime Bain banker, if he wanted to put together a group to buy out his partners, essentially, that would make sense to me, and also would keep some sort of continuity in the team as well. I mentioned the Jacobs family, again, also local, own the arena, which certainly makes the team, I guess, slightly more valuable to them. Outside of that, again, I think you could find there's a lot of this geography that comes into play here in terms of billionaires and where they are and where they want to own teams. So if it's not a Boston person, a billionaire who lives in New York, for example, loves the idea of being able to get to a game on a private jet in an hour and then watch the game and be home in New York by 1 a.m. All those things are.
You know who hates that? Every single Celtics fan in Boston.
Yeah, exactly.
Get out of our city, bro.
Yeah, so we'll see. I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting layers to this, and I do think sometimes owners sell and they don't care about who buys and what it means for the steward of the franchise. Having talked to Wick a lot and some of those other guys, I have a feeling that they are going to care about who they sell to and what the direction they are and maybe what city they're from and what they're thinking about for the Celtics longer term. So I think all those things will come into play. But if you're asking me to put a list together, Fenway is top of the list just because of all those things I mentioned.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Is LeBron still part of the Fenway group?
He is,
very small level, because
that
would be pretty funny if he owned the Celtics.
So he wouldn't be allowed to.
Well, until he retires.
Until he retires, So they would need to, and they can obviously do this. They'd have to structure something where LeBron's equity doesn't hold over into whatever whole company holds the Celtics, at least until he steps down. But yeah, LeBron will own a piece of an NBA team for sure, via Fenway at some point. My guess is in the next 5 years, and it will either be Las Vegas is certainly the betting favorite. Bad pun, but I don't think Fenway expected the Celtics to be on the market anytime soon.
Game 6, LeBron, Miami owning the Celtics / former Laker LeBron owning a piece of the Celtics.
Owning the Celtics also, yeah.
That is good. That is rich. That is fun. Eben, I want to close with one other thought here, though, because this is something we talked about quite a bit here in DC, and it's still on some level a topic. Leonsis owns multiple teams, and when it came to the arena stuff, I think people realize why that can be really problematic. If one dude owns multiple teams, he's got an amount of leverage over a city that doesn't feel right. And especially as he continues to poke around the Nationals, it's like, oh my God, if he owns 3 of the 4 teams, he's got insane leverage over the District of Columbia. And I don't think most people think that's good. So is that something in ownership circles or around kind of the sports business world? Is that something that is talked about? And when we talk about the Fenway Group or the folks who own the Bruins potentially owning the Celtics, would that potentially be a concern? Not that the NBA would necessarily block it, but that the city of Boston might be oh, wait a second, we need to make sure that we have divestment and ownership amongst these groups.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about that topic from 2 different angles, right? The NBA, I don't think cares. In fact, I could see an argument for the NBA liking the idea of overlap here, makes scheduling easier, makes the arena situation easier. And again, for Ted's been vocal. He's only going to buy teams in the DC area, right? He's also thinking about that. And I'm not sure if leverage is exactly the word that he would probably use. I think he'd use synergies, but we're all talking about the same kind of things here, right? You have groups like Fenway that could own a team in Boston and a team in Pittsburgh and a team in Las Vegas and not care. And then you have groups like Monumental who are very vocal and out there saying, we're not interested in Boston or Vegas or Pittsburgh. We're interested in DC and maybe Baltimore and maybe Northern Virginia. And that's pretty much it. So I don't think it would care on the NBA side. From the city side or from the fan side, Jacobs doesn't have a great reputation. The Bruins owner, I'm sure there are some Celtics fans that would feel some sort of way, but I think those concerns would be more about spending and approach and less about the leverage that the owner would have. But it's certainly interesting to think about. We are in this era, as you know, Craig, of the super owner. It feels like everybody that buys a team now is somebody that already owns a team in some capacity. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So the idea of single city or multi-city big ownership groups in the mold of Kroenke or Monumental or HBSE, Harris, and all that, I think is either good or bad. Maybe for fans, bad, but I think that's the future that we're in for at least the next couple decades.
Yeah, I personally don't care whether you own multiple teams. I just don't want you to own them in my city. Like, I don't want you to. Oh, you can own one.
Yeah.
If you're Stan Kroenke, and I know he actually owns multiple in Denver, but like,
yeah.
You own LA and Denver or Harris Blitzer. Like, you got up and down the I-95 corridor. Like, fine, but when it comes time to do the negotiations for arenas and stuff that ultimately affects my, not only like, of course, you want a good owner for fandom purposes, but like as a taxpayer. That's where I think it gets really interesting. So something that the city of Boston, hey, Boston, pay attention. Stay on your toes up there. All right. Eben Novy-Williams, for more coverage of this, head over to Sportico. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.